Thank you for joining us. We will be getting started shortly. We will just waiting for the remainder of our viewers to join the webinar. Thank you. Thank you to those that have just joined onto the webinar. We will be getting started shortly. We're just waiting for the remainder of our viewers to join. Thank you for joining us, and we'll just give it another minute and then we will make a start. We just want to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to join onto the webinar. Thank you. I think we will make a start. So good afternoon and welcome. There are just a few housekeeping notices we'd like to run through at the start of the webinar. So in terms of the Zoom platform, it is a public platform, so please don't share any private or confidential information in the chat box. And the event is also being recorded to give viewers the opportunity to review this post-event. In terms of any questions for the panel, please do use the Q&A box. And if you do have any comments or suggestions, please do pop them into the chat box. And I will now hand over to Elaine Arnold. Thank you.
Welcome everybody, and welcome to the first webinar from the school for this academic year. So we're very pleased to see you. We're joined today by a colleague and friend for a long time now from University of West London, and Motoko is going to be speaking about decolonising social work and what it would be like if we started to think from different perspectives and be inclusive of different perspectives in social work theory and method and practice. So I hope we get to have a really interesting discussion and debate in this. And of course, this webinar is taking place during Black History Month. So we are actually really pleased to actually begin part of this discussion with you all during that month. So the presentation today is If Lions Could Write, They Would Tell Their Stories, Giving Lions a Voice. And our presenter is Motoko Ngubezi Sampson, and she's from the University of West London, where she's a senior lecturer and also the lead social worker for the programmes there. I'm now going to hand over to Motoko. Welcome.
Hi, thank you, Elaine, for inviting me, and thank you for being an ally as well, because I know around Black History Month, everybody looks for a Black friend to involve. But Elaine is an ally all year round. She's fought many battles on behalf of people like me, and I have a lot of battles that I've fought with Elaine. So this is not some Black History Month virtue signaling. This is how she lives. So thank you so much for your invite, and thank you for attending. I am not going to be providing answers, but my webinar here is just a discussion, just for us to start thinking about things a certain way. And I welcome some discussions, and we are here to learn. And I just hope all of us will be able to contribute and ask questions and challenge each other, perhaps, and then it will help us to learn and move forward. Elaine is can you give me the next slide, please? Okay, Chinua Achebe, who was one of the most prominent and really one of the best writers Africa has ever seen, came up with this saying to say, until lions learn to write, every story will glorify the hunter. And we know that. We know that we've never read a story about a lion being brave and chasing the hunter away because lions cannot write. So in everything that we hear hunters coming out of the battlefield as heroes. So we see them coming home after a hunt, and we say, "Oh, that's amazing! You came home with the results of your hunt." But then we don't know what happened there. The reason why we don't know is because the only people who tell us what happened are the hunters who have the pen in their hands. So why is this relevant? This is relevant because this is how education has been in social work. Social work education and practice, it has always been about the hunter carrying a pen and writing all the stories, and every story ends up with them being winners. So that is why I thought this is a good metaphor for us to start our discussion, so that we will be able to start looking at what does it mean to be a lion in this situation. Lions are very strong, lions are brave, but then nobody knows anything about what they are up to and their dreams and their aspirations and what they want to see happen, because they don't have a pen. But people who have a pen are the hunters. Can you move, please, Elaine? So we are doing this a webinar in the context of social work being a profession where families and children from minoritized ethnic groups are overrepresented. So when you look at every local authority, even where minoritized groups are very few, you find that still they are overrepresented in their social services statistics. We are doing this in the context of students from minoritized ethnic groups in universities have a lower attainment gap than their white counterparts. So I'm going to use the word white just to symbolize anyone who's not from the minoritized ethnic groups. I'm aware that other people who are not from minoritized ethnic groups do not call themselves white. But also I'm talking about minoritized ethnic groups. I'm referring to people like people who are of Black, Afro-Caribbean descent, and people who are of Asian backgrounds, meaning Indians, Pakistan, and some of those minoritized background. This year in March, there was a Deming report that came from Social Work England, which was called the Anti-Racism Report. It makes for grim reading because it talks about many experiences of social workers and even social work students where they've experienced racism at work. It's about how they felt unseen, how they were passed for promotions and everything. So this is the context. And then when we look at the number of social work professionals, we have so many social workers in the UK, but when it comes to professors from Black backgrounds, we have about 10 or so. And that is the background that we are doing this, and that's the context of this presentation. Elaine, please. So when I know that it has become for some people a buzzword, decolonizing, and I know sometimes even that is a power statement. It's about people sometimes maybe undermining the whole decoloniality movement by saying it's a buzzword, because sometimes people call things buzzwords so that people will stop listening because it's like, it's a buzzword, we don't have to listen. But I'm saying it's a buzzword because it's used in different contexts. Sometimes it's used out of its intended context. That's why I'm saying it's a buzzword. I'm not talking about the action and the meaning behind it. So when we think about colonization, we think about subjugation, we think about racism, we think about appropriation of wealth. And when we talk about the appropriation of wealth, we are also talking about the education. When we look at social work as it is, the knowledge base for social work practice, theories, practice, and everything is skewed, and is only skewed towards the Western knowledge and practice. So when you are someone from minoritized ethnic groups being involved in this process, perhaps you are a mother, you are a father, you are a family, you are a young person, you are working in a context um, of a colonized social work profession. When we look at indigenous knowledge from the global south, is either appropriated or not taken into consideration. So it's like, I've worked with a lot of families where they felt they were losing the battle with their children, not because they did not know how to raise their children, but they have been disempowered by this fear of social work involvement, that they end up not knowing what is the right thing to do when it comes to disciplining their children. So can they tell them to go to a naughty corner or go to their room? What can they do? Can they smack them a little bit? What is it? They don't know, because all the power is in the hands of professionals who are making decisions. So that is why they felt so disempowered. And so how they would have raised their children, how they would have decided on punishment and reward is considered wrong or inappropriate, then they feel they have lost everything. And this colonization has been a cultural project. It has been a cultural project because through socialization, many people from minoritized ethnic groups all over the world, actually, we've seen that with the Maori in New Zealand, we've seen it with Native Indians in America, we've seen it with First Nations cultures in Australia, in Canada. So we've seen all that. We've seen that what works is when people from minoritized ethnic groups assimilate. So if you do not assimilate, then you have your whole culture is being questioned. So as a consequence, social work has played and colluded with this system that has subjugated, oppressed, and appropriated other people's wealth and knowledge without acknowledging it and putting it in its rightful place. And I know that one of the worst offenders for this will be people like anthropologists, but social work has, they don't have their hands clean as well, because they were working with social work. The challenge is working as a part of the community and part of the state. So your heart is between looking after people and doing the right thing, but also you have to do it within the context of the laws that exist. So whatever policy exists, you need to work within that policy. And power belongs to the one who holds the pen. So in everything that is happening, if you are holding the pen, the same way as hunters do, you are the person who holds the power. And power is a very, very important thing to consider in social work, because the whole process of decolonization is based on power or lack of. So that is why it's important for us in everything that we do. We need to consider that whatever you do, the one who's holding the pen is the one with a lot of power. So when we talk about decolonization, we are talking about interrupting the power structures that continue to oppress people from minoritized ethnic groups. So this means that we as social workers, We are trying to look at the structures. We are trying to look at the policy. We're trying to look at the practice and see what is it about this policy that does not work. And then that starts with social work education. So how do we prepare our social workers for future work as social workers with the current curriculum that is looking only at how westernized knowledge and values and contributions are the only ones who are considered? So when we look at social work, it's happening within the context of relentless and invasive politics of fear, hate, racism, and neoliberalism. So when you're considering how many services are privatized, and when you look at social work, even 10 years ago, there were so many services that were done within social work, but those services have now been privatized, and now they're in the hands of small companies or big companies or groups of people. But what that means is that it is them who make those rules. So whatever is happening, they could even shift from the from the social work paradigm, because they are owning the company. So with that, some of the social work values have shifted, and social work now is not as equipped as it should be with meaningful structural change in a desperate and is in desperate need of transformation. So without social work changing itself internally, we won't be able to see social work change in any way. And it's not only about changing social work theories and practices, but it is about making sure that we challenge the underlying beliefs that form the basis of everything that social work does. So you can change the theory, but then what informs that theory? So we need to make sure that everything that we are doing in social work, we are challenging that, we are looking at that, and we are saying, well, we understand sometimes when changes need to happen, it's so easy to have those cosmetic changes that say, are you happy now? You know, like how companies will rent one person or from ethnic minority backgrounds and say, well, we have one of you here, so we are not really, we understand diversity that well. Sometimes that will mean it's just one person representing every form of a diversity. So this will be one person with a disability who happens to be maybe a homosexual person or something else. And then they will say, well, we have this one person who happens to be homosexual, who happens to be to have some disability, who happens to be a woman, who happens to be. So then it's those are cosmetic changes. Those are not challenging the structures that gave rise to what it is that companies will be, whatever challenges that need to be dealt with head on. And when we talk about decolonizing social work, we are talking about many different dimensions, because social work is made of many different dimensions. So we need to look at identifying destructive beliefs and practices within social work. What are those destructive beliefs that we are talking about? How is it that when you look at the Social Work England report, it is saying a lot. When you're looking at the number of academics in social work, how many they are. So those are all the structural changes that need to be challenged. Reclaiming indigenous beliefs and practices, and learning from successful decolonization to improve social work practice with indigenous and non-indigenous populations. I have found that in America, in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, they've done a lot more work on this, on decolonizing social work. They've written a lot more. So that is why some of the literature that I have cited is coming from those countries, because I've been so interested in what they are doing and what they are saying. So we need to find a way to incorporate meaningfully cultures and knowledge from other backgrounds, because if we do not do that, social work will still be like this in 100 years' time. And when we talk about critical consciousness, we need to start developing transformational awareness of all the systems, parts of the systems that are potentially oppressive, when we are talking about economic, political, and other systems. So in working with people without understanding and breaking down these systems, then we can never meaningfully decolonize social work. Sometimes oppression may be overt. It's overt in the overrepresentation of minoritized communities in social services statistics. It's overt in the Social Work England anti-racism report. It's overt in the career progression. It's overt in the attainment gap of students from minoritized ethnic groups. So sometimes it's very subtle. Having worked in academia, I have dealt with subtle racism. And I have dealt with also window dressing, where sometimes you are given something that means nothing, but on paper, when they are talking to Athena Swan and doing their annual report, they can give you that title and it doesn't mean anything. But also you have dealt with a lot of people who are working with you, who can see what is happening. And I like the concept of liberating both the oppressor and the oppressed, because with all, it takes a lot of work to try and keep people down. But if you open things up, then both the oppressor and the oppressed will be liberated, because once you start working openly and hearing other sides of the story and saying, well, this is something that is happening, how do you feel it experienced where you are? Because sometimes our white colleagues do not understand. So when you talk about certain things, sometimes they view it as an over or maybe an overreaction, because it's not something they have experienced. But you do have a lot of white allies who do not know what to do, because they cannot understand their role in this whole process. So that's why it's important to consider liberating both the oppressor and the oppressed, because sometimes this oppression is not something that the powers that be seek out to do. It's just the lack of understanding. So it doesn't, you cannot do decolonization without a collaboration, without considering expertise from other groups. But we need to share knowledge in everything that we do. We need to share values and we share wisdom. When colonization happened, everywhere the colonizers went, as we saw in my first slide, that map of colonization, which countries colonized which African countries. So their values were not considered as valid values. So everything they believed in when it comes to raising their children, their families, the role of children, women, men, community, in everything, was not considered valid, because it was not from the Western understanding of what these roles should be like. So we need to we need to educate. We need to educate. I found that after George Floyd's murder, I now realize that some of it was really fake, because some people will come to you and say, oh, it's so horrible what's happening. How can I learn? And then you spend all this time helping your colleagues to learn. And then when it was off the news, the headline news, people went back to what they are used to doing. So that's why education is very important, because without that, social work will continue to be oppressive. So we need to be reflexive in everything that we're doing. Reflect and turn things upside down and say, well, this is what it is. What else can I do? And just go deep into everything, and you can't be reflexive without looking at yourself and ask yourself important questions about your role in the oppression. So we need to consider how this knowledge is constructed, because every culture has knowledge that is constructed based on perhaps their oral history and everything that came with them. But colonization stripped away all that from communities. Only now are communities trying to build again. So we need to make sure that we consider knowledge base from all sorts of background. We need to make sure that we do culturally focused research, so that we know that we are involved in this co-construction of knowledge and being respectful and understanding their whatever their knowledge they bring to the table is also very genuine and important. So this is very important. So it's not about Sue White talks about the concept of white is always right. She challenges that in her paper on decolonization. So we have worked a lot with this in social work, where white ideas are always right. And we need to challenge that. We need to challenge that, because I don't believe anyone goes into the profession of social work with an intention of oppressing anybody. But because we are guided by what we know, what we are used to, and what we've learned over the years, we end up going back to what we know instead of trying to learn new things. Okay. Can you move the slide? Yeah. So one of the main ways we can start decolonizing or continue decolonizing social work is through research, because research informs what we read, what we teach our students. So there is a lot of irony in using Western methodologies and trying to do indigenous research. I like this quote by Smith, who says, "Who will listen when I speak, when knowledge production is controlled largely by the West?" And this is the big irony, because they use their measures to measure whether you as a researcher are doing the right thing. So if we are trying to decolonize, we need to start using our own research methodologies. Even now, I have spoken to a number of PhD students from minoritized ethnic groups who have experienced this head on, because whatever you're trying to put forward is only valid if the person who's marking you thinks it's right. So if that person does not agree with your idea, then whatever you're saying then is not right, because the research is controlled by them. It needs to be done a certain way. You need to say things a certain way. And that is what happens. And respondents in some of this important research all over the world, they are always taken, okay, we'll give you 3 months of our time and we get all this research, and then they take all the knowledge and they hardly ever make a mention of those communities. So they are all condemned to obscurity, while Western researchers get established as experts in that knowledge. But they are not even from that culture. But they are experts because they've appropriated whatever they wanted to appropriate, and they've gone back to where they come from. And if that research is not helping people, if we are doing all sorts of research and it still leaves our people oppressed, then it should not be done. Then it's not worth it. So we need to think about making sure that our research is looking at theoretical frameworks that are friendly to doing research with minoritized ethnic group. We will not find a way. We cannot integrate without making sure that our research is interpreted in a way that comes from people from minoritized ethnic groups. I have a friend in Kent University who is doing research, and she's not doing any of these methodologies, and she's doing Indaba methodology, which is very powerful because that's a complete African methodology. and she's saying, well, we do storytelling, we're doing this, we're doing that. And they are saying, some researchers were saying, well, we can't really evaluate if your research meets the criteria because that methodology is not recognized. But then how are we ever going to get it recognized if people like Slibaziso, their research is not considered because it doesn't form into this mold? So again, the assimilation that all these minoritized ethnic groups have always been expected to do, so that they can perform according to what the Western standards say. And this is a big thing because I know, being South African, this has been a big thing where they had these protests around 2016, where they talked about road must fall, and it's talking about not only the symbols of apartheid South Africa, but also about the knowledge, how it is constructed. So there's a lot of work being done in South Africa right now to look at this Western-centric curricula. I know that other universities here are trying. I know Oxford Brookes has done some work, and I don't know to what extent. But with that, usually when students go out to protest, and of course, there will be some destruction of property along the way. There is not a lot of attention paid to this violence, epistemic violence that is meted on the people, because through this curriculum, this is a symbol of violence. So Poggio talks about symbolic violence. And when we talk about that, it's also looking at that. And also Foucault talks a lot about that kind of violence that is not spoken, that is subtle. So when we continue to do this, we are committing acts of violence. And where is the challenge on those acts of epistemic violence? How are they challenged? When are they challenged? Who challenges them? So students all over the world do not know exactly what a decolonized curriculum will look like, but they know that we need to make these things change for the better. So that is why it's important to stay on it, because when you education is a political, and that pedagogy should be I'm trying to read and I'm not doing a good job of it. So it's when you are looking at pedagogy, and Freire talks a lot about how this education is created in a way that favors the teacher instead of a learner. So we need to make sure that it's about transferring knowledge and values. We are expected through education to transform. And if we are doing that, it means then we are assimilating to what the oppressor expects us to do. But if we are working together in the co-construction of knowledge, it will mean that all of us are represented in the new curriculum, and it's also showing that our knowledge and value base and background are taken into consideration. Okay, as I said, I am not trying to make I am not trying to come up with solutions, but I just thought with the lack of permanent universal answer on colonization and decolonization, it doesn't mean that there are no answers. It means that let's start with what we know. Let's start with what we have. We need to consider both ideas and actions. As I was saying about people like Elaine, they don't just talk the talk. They are involved. They've been pushing, let's do this, let's see how this is done. They have spoken up, Elaine has spoken up for me in places where I just thought, well, maybe it's me who's overreacting. It's not, because usually when you're someone in my position, meaning someone from minoritized ethnic groups, sometimes when things happen to you, you wonder if you're overreacting or actually you're experiencing oppression. So it's about making sure we look at both ideas and actions so that it could be meaningful. Instead of focusing on efforts to try and change the colonizers, we need to start changing ourselves as social workers, because that is how change happens. It starts inside you, like Michael Jackson, Man in the Mirror. So that's what we need to start doing. And I don't know if I've talked enough about power, but that's it's pervasive in everything that we do. And if we look at how much power we have as social workers, if someone has enough power to look at you and say, I don't think your children, you are fit enough to continue looking after your children, that's a lot of power. But if that power comes in the hands of someone who does not understand that power, or who also does not understand the material and circumstances of the person who they are dealing with, then it's in dangerous hands. So we need to always consider power. And I just hope this will be the last generation where lions are still fighting to have their rose head. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Motoko. I will stop sharing, and I will open it up. One of the way for people to ask questions is in the question and answer box. There's no open questions there yet at the moment, so I wonder if anyone has any questions for Motoko. Would they like to pop them into the question and answer box? And I can start off, Motoko, with a question.
Okay.
And hopefully everybody will get typing their questions, because you can't speak audience, I'm afraid. You can only type, and I'll pick up those and ask them to Motoko as soon as you pop them in. I think you gave us lots to think about there, and it was broad ranging, both across social work as a profession as well as social work academics, as you are and as I am. And then I think you also made us think more broadly about our history and the way we actually construct knowledge as well. So what I was thinking is, I wondered if, well, I've got a number of questions actually, because I was writing them down and my pens were running out as I was going along. So there were a couple of things, but I guess one of the earliest questions I had was, you said that Social Work England report is called Anti-Racist Social Work. And I just wondered, what do you think the difference is in the terminology anti-racist social work practice and decolonised social work practice?
I remember Mother Teresa said, I'll never attend any march that is any march that has on it is talking about maybe anti-domestic violence march. I'll never attend a march like that, because already it's starting from a negative point of view. I am thinking that perhaps if we call something anti-racist, we are only looking at it narrowly, because we are only looking at it in terms of relational issues, in terms of different races. But when we are talking about we are not touching on power in an explicit manner. I know that racism comes with a lot of power. But when we are talking about decolonizing, we're talking about the very structures that are working within. We need to interrupt them. We need to say, we have seen these power structures operating all these years. How do we interrupt those power dynamics? How do we interrupt even the language that that is used in social work? How families are dealt with? We are not only talking Islam, because when we talk about decolonizing, remember, at times with this decolonizing, we need to think of our white brothers and sisters who are in the working class, because in some aspects, they are also part of this. They end up experiencing some of this oppression. So that is why when we are talking about only racism, it's not enough. We need to look at the power structures and challenge the basis upon which this is this is standing. So Chinua Achebe talks about if the center cannot stand, things fall apart. So if we challenge this and dismantle the system, nothing will be able to stand on this system without this system being buttressed with a bit more information, knowledge, culture from different people so that it could be less oppressive.
Okay. Okay, and the questions are flying in thick and fast now, actually. So I'm going to ask you these. I think we're going to keep you busy, Motoko. So Sandra Simpson, who works for our West Midlands Teaching Partnership, welcome, Sandra. Asks, what do you think Social Work England's role is in decolonisation of social work?
I have a love-hate relationship with Social Work England. I have a love-hate relationship with Social Work England because, first of all, its formation, it is part of the government. I have seen BASWA doing more than Social Work England, so that is the problem. And also they are still part of the systems that have been oppressing social workers. So when you consider even their own report, this anti-racism report, identified that statistically, you will find more social workers from minoritized ethnic groups going to FTP. And about 2% of those FTPs are upheld. So there is something wrong with a regulator who spends all that money trying to determine if people are oppressed, and if only 2% of those hearings are successful, because it means then structurally there's something very wrong with Social Work England. Social Work England is still made of a lot of people who are not social workers. So that poses some of the problems here, because that is some of the issues that Social Work England will need to deal with. And Social Work England, even their own management, even their own structures, they are still not decolonized because it's still very white-led in many aspects. So Social Work England will still need to do a lot of work. That report, if that report was about the BBC, I'm sure they would have said, change the structure of BBC. There's a lot of problems. But I am hoping in the process, Social Work England will continue to transform. But as it is, I still have a lot of love and respect for it. But I do have this hate relationship because I don't think at the moment they are getting it right.
Thank you. And then I've got lots of questions for you, Motoko, so I'm not going to respond in any way to any of them. I'm just going to keep asking the questions. So Angeliki Andrikaki, and I hope I'm pronouncing people's names properly, says, good afternoon, thank you for today's talk. I have two questions. Could you please give us an example of critical consciousness in social work in the development of transformational awareness?
Okay. Critical, what did you ask? Sorry, someone came in and I lost my train.
Sorry, it's could you please give us an examples of the critical consciousness in social work in the development of transformational awareness? So
okay.
Yeah.
That is all part of the process. For example, in social work, we do a lot of work with communities, but often that does not translate in what we are teaching and how we are teaching. We need to start involving people with lived experiences, not only in coming to speak to our students and everything, but that critical consciousness comes from understanding each person and their background. It comes from understanding the structural inequalities that each person is dealing with. It also comes with understanding that within this, there's a lot of power dynamics. So if you're working with someone and you are looking at all these aspects, I research on family group conferencing. Even within the family group conference process, you are aware that even within the family, there are different power dynamics, whether it's between a child and an adult, or different genders within the family, or between the social worker and the family. So when you look at those dynamics and break them down and understand what that means, what does it mean for someone to have a disability? And through that, we need to understand this intersectionality and the meaning of this oppression. What does it mean for this person to be involved in this situation, and for them to experience oppression the way they are expressing it, they are experiencing it? And what do I do as a worker to make that better, starting with our students here? We talk about the attainment gap. How do we understand the attainment gap from the perspective of our students? So in everything that we do, we need to break things down and take this person, pull them apart, put them in their in the spectrum of intersectionality, and try to understand, not from ourselves, ask them, what does this mean for you? And then through that, we will be able to make things better. We'll be able to transform the systems.
Thank you. And Angelique's second question was, she says she absolutely agrees with you that education is fundamentally political, and she would like to ask your opinion about empowering and educating university students to view their own education in those terms, challenging the political function and roots of their education program, which I think probably touches on what you just talked about, actually, doesn't it? Do you want me to read that out again? Yeah. So agrees with you about education being fundamentally political, and asks your opinion on how I think you might empower and educate university students to actually view their own education in terms of being fundamentally political, and using that to challenge political function and roots of their education programs.
It's different aspects, because speaking about students from minoritized ethnic backgrounds, I find that most of those students have to work. So coming to university is just one of the things, and being activists in the university end up being a secondary thing, because they have to focus on keeping the lights on at home, or looking after their families back home. So for that is always difficult. But also within the teaching, we need to also involve them, as I have, as Elaine has said, I've sort of touched on it. We need to involve them and understand their experiences. So in understanding their experiences, we need to find out where we can meet them halfway, because those experiences are unique to them. We may not even understand what that means and how that works for them. But in not understanding that, we could further oppress them by not hearing them out. I think the most important thing here is to hear and understand those experiences, and ask them, how do you want us to address that? What will make sense to you? And I know that sometimes some students, some people will say, oh, students from minoritized background, they don't write well. But then some of them don't even access the support. The support cannot be accessed if it means that after class I'm going to go and go to academic support because I have my shift in the afternoon. So that's why universities now are doing a lot of stuff online. There are a lot of ways they are trying to see how they can meet students halfway. But it's also about, Harriet Tubman said, I freed many slaves, and I would have freed a lot more if they knew they were slaves. It's about also taking responsibility of understanding your circumstances and to be able to address them in that way. So if you don't understand that it's a problem that your attainment gap is lower, then we will need to raise awareness and consciousness with that as well. So it's a multi-pronged strategy, and it can be attacked in many different ways.
Thank you. And that's, I think very, very relevant for some of the work that we're doing currently here at Wolverhampton. Elaine Codrington has asked, and it's linked again, how can social work students challenge the existing curriculum without placing themselves at risk of failing their courses? Very pertinent question, because it all goes to the heart of all that power, doesn't it?
Well, you talked about power. I was about to respond. There's a lot of power in social work, and I have seen, I'm talking about academia. I've seen some students who will be spoken to or spoken about a certain way because they ask questions. And I'm also aware that it's the same thing with families that we work with. There are families that have been labeled as difficult because they are asking questions. Patients that have been labeled as difficult because they say, you can't discharge me without explaining what this means for you. You've given me my chart. I don't know what that means. A social worker who says to people, well, we are going to do a section 17. So we are going to have a strat, and then a section 17 will step down and do maybe a section 47. So you are saying all those things. You might as well be speaking, and you are speaking a foreign language because they don't understand. Bojo talks about the field, and every field having their field specific rules. And if you don't understand those field specific rules, it will be difficult for you to understand whatever is dealt with. And that's exactly how families feel when they work with social workers, how students feel when they work with academics. Perhaps one of the ways you can think about that is to first consider how might you want to influence the curriculum, because you are, as a student, allowed to challenge certain views and say, well, I understand. We always have a lot of debate in our social work classes, because we have students from different backgrounds, and they will say, well, this is how I would experience something like that. So as a person who's lecturing, you take that into consideration. So if you're talking, for example, they will, if social work will do things like write a report and say the parents left a child with strangers. And to them, they are not strangers because they come from the same country and they know somebody who knows somebody. And at the time, you as a social worker, you say they are not related, but the idea of relationships, their genogram does not work like that, because it includes a lot. So when you consider like Bronfenbrenner, it considers a lot of aspects, and those aspects the, those aspects are those aspects need to be taken into consideration in everything that you are doing.
Thanks, Motoko. I've still got a few more for you, sorry. Okay, so Mev Clues has asked, do you think that minority groups can also unintentionally colonize each other because of the power structures and cultures we have been a part of living in the West?
Sorry, some people are coming in, so I'm trying to get another device so that I can move, because it's not, they haven't booked it, but I think they just want to come in. Yeah.
Okay.
What do you think, what do you mean by colonizing each other?
I don't know. I don't know. Do you want me to move, Mev? If you could just specify that a little bit more, I can come back to this question, and I'll move on to Jenny Hawkins' question. She says she agrees with you that you can't fight negativity from a negative perspective. Perhaps, it's a comment really rather than a question. Perhaps the report should have been Social Work England's Equality, Inclusion and Diversity report, perhaps rather than the anti-racist report. And then an anonymous attendee asks, what can or could social work academia and practice take from critical race theory?
you it's so interesting because when you look at the critical race theory, it's been there for many years, but now it's like everyone is like jumping on it like it's a new thing. So when you consider how people become who they are, when you consider intersectionality, when you consider each person's experiences and how they inform who they are, and how that also a better way of analyzing someone's background, instead of using these theories that do not consider your background. And it's not just your background, but break it down and look at the challenges and what it means within that intersectionality. Social work cannot, and I suppose theories like Bronfenbrenner have already started saying it cannot be just this. We need to open different layers of the person's onion. And if we are, as social workers, looking at that and understanding that, it's going to give us a better picture of the people we are working with.
Okay. Vanessa Graham asks, do you think that the theories we apply to social work today are outdated?
Some of them are. Some of them are. Like social work, they are always talking about attachment, and attachment is their benchmark for parenting, whether you are a good parent or not, because the attachment is like this or like that. That is the benchmark that is used. But then that whole attachment theory does not take into consideration. I know that Mary Ainsworth and other theorists have challenged some of that. But when we are using that theory that only considers the milestones that are only based on Western kind of milestones. So every child growing up has to be looked at according to those milestones. But that what that means is then it becomes oppressive to other groups, because that milestone means that I may not understand. And also understanding for example, if you visit someone's home and you find an 8-year-old doing the dishes, then you as a social worker could see that as oppression. So those theories, the lens that we are using to look at families and decide whether they are correct, they are able to look after their children or not, are not the correct lenses. And that is one of the reasons why that could account for the overrepresentation. I'm starting a bit of work at some point on the assessment triangle. I'm looking at it and I'm saying, how does this assessment triangle contribute to the overrepresentation of minoritized ethnic groups in social services statistics? Because it is so open to interpretation. So if I say emotional warmth, what do I mean by that? And which lens am I using if I'm talking about stimulation? So what's stimulation? So if my children go out and play with friends and come back, is that wrong or right? So is it only stimulation if I'm playing hide and seek in the house with them? So it's all the stuff that we need to look at, because we, as you said, it cannot always be white is right. It needs to look at other ways of doing things.
And I think it was interesting to me because we've got some PhDs here looking at the overrepresentation of African families for child protection proceedings, where the use of violence is an issue. But we also have someone who's looking at honour-based violence and how it is or is not engaged with, really, and using genograms as a research tool. And it just occurred to me when you talked about genograms. So we've been thinking about them as a practice tool, and she's been looking at how they can be applied or used as a research tool. But it's quite interesting if you think about genograms as constructed to reflect particular types of families. That was interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. I believe she couldn't be on this call today. She was hoping to watch it afterwards. So I will discuss that with her afterwards. That was interesting. Thanks, Motoko. We've got one last question. Mev, who'd asked the recolonizing question, I haven't They haven't retyped. So this last question that I have at the moment is from Abby Henry, and it says, shouldn't this, I think probably decolonisation is the this, shouldn't this also form part of the school curriculum?
Definitely, definitely. And you can see in other countries this is being done. I've done some work with someone in Canada. They have done so much work on this from the time and how they always revert back to tribal communities and asking them about we want to build a school. How would you want to design that school? What should be in that school? When it comes to community centers, you don't get these big architects from big cities who are deciding this is what a community center will look like. Now everything they do, they will go to family, to communities and say, how do you want this to happen? And this is something that needs to be started at school, you see, because when you are raising children, when we look at school is one of the agents of primary socialization, because children spend a lot of time there. So if these understandings are given to students, to children at that age, you find that child will grow up being a better aware child, because now they can see things, because and also they can also see when things are not being done the right way at home, because sometimes children will grow up thinking it is wrong to play with other kids, and then when they come to school they listen and they understand why their parents say that, and then they can start understanding that, well, that was a way of thinking back then, but now things are different. And I think education needs to start at home, it needs to start at school, it needs to start anywhere where children are, so that they can start, like the example of things like Black History Month. Some people never knew there was ever a Black person who was never in prison or something, because they never knew about any Black heroes, because it never happened. It never crossed anybody's mind to say, actually, so and so did this, did that, did that. And then now they're like, okay. But whenever they hear about people from ethnic minorities, it's like so and so is in prison for doing this and that. So it creates a certain association. But once you start teaching children that, actually, do you know who invented the traffic light? Do you know who invented this in science? Then people start to understand that this is part of the colonization. This is the oppression, where everything Black was put under the carpet, taken what they could, and then left people like that, emotionally bankrupt, and then continued to use the inventions and enriching their generations of their families in the process, without giving even a shout out to people who were irresponsible for doing that.
Okay, thank you. So, and then Vanessa, who'd asked the question about outdated theories or theories that might be outdated, has asked it, and I don't know if it's related to the discussion around genogram or if it's related to asks, is this a lack of understanding around cultural difference? So I guess it's that interconnection around theory and understanding cultural differences.
My research is on family group conferencing, so I can speak about the Maori society. With them, a child does not belong to a family. So if there is a problem within a family, then you need to organize a family group conference, so that the whole clan will look at that problem and see, excuse me, how that problem can be addressed. So if you are doing a genogram for a family where there's that kind of setup, then you will need to understand that within them, the family does not come only around mom and dad and cousin. The whole community is involved. When I was in practice, usually when we had family group conferences, for example, or child protection conferences for Somali families, there was usually an elder there from the Somali community, because they cannot handle their affairs in exile as they are in this country without their elders, because their elders are the people who keep them together. They are the people who know their affairs, who mediate when they are not in agreement, who help them. So without understanding them, then you are going to say, we can't have people who are not family in the child protection conference. But then for them, that's their family. So when you work with communities, you will need to understand something like that. It may not be the kind of family we understand, but it's not for us to say it's wrong because we don't understand it. It only means it's their family. That's how they define it, and let it be so. Yeah, on mute.
I sound best like that. Was asking the question about lack of understanding around cultural difference in linking theory to practice. So I think you did pick up on that, Motoko. That's the last question I have. There are some comments. So Vanessa has also asked, are we able to have the reference list from the presentation? So I don't know if you're happy to share that with people if they were to send you, or I can send people. If people were to send me or Motoko their email or post it into the chat, we can send that if you're happy with that, Motoko. And
I haven't written it in detail because I wrote it for my understanding. So it's just, it was my prompt. So if you can get something out of it, you can. But it was just for me to prompt myself. So it's not as detailed as proper notes would have been.
Yeah. And
I lost you there for a minute. Elaine? I can't hear you. Hi, Elaine? Can you hear me? Elaine, I think I've lost you.
So you will.
Are you still with us, Elaine? I think the sound just dropped there for a moment.
Yeah. I thought it was me.
It's just.
Yeah, we can. I think you're back with us now. I think we just lost you there for a moment. Sorry to startle you.
Oh no, it's always around lunchtime here. I don't know what happens. I'm really sorry. And
I think I've lost you again.
If you just bear with us a moment, and then I think Elaine will be back with us just whilst her connection resumes. Thank you.
hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry, I have for some reason this week my internet connection becomes upset around about lunchtime. But I wonder, we actually don't have any more questions. There's lots of people popping their email addresses into the chat to receive the slides. And I think lots of people are needing to start to leave. So I wonder if this might be a good time to draw it to a close if there aren't any more questions. Because it mainly looks like people have popped things in there. People had said, thank you very much, and it was so interesting and informative. And you've certainly had a lovely big audience, Motoko. Is there anything else you wanted to say before we drew it to a close?
Well, thank you again for inviting me, and also sometimes things like this seem like so insurmountable, and we all feel like we can't do it because it's too much. Just think about one thing that you can do. Just one thing that you can do, and that one thing would become something else. So just any effort you can make, sometimes your effort will just involve the discussion with someone else and just understanding where they come from. Maybe that's all you can manage where you are. But at the end of the day, it's just about making sure that everything that you do, it's about making sure you do the little bits that you can do. And thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Motoko, and absolutely everyone is saying thank you to you in the chat if you can see it. Thank you all for coming and for being part of this discussion. And I hope we can really use it to inform social work theory and education and practice. Thank you, Motoko, for your time and for doing this for us, and to Elena for hosting it for us. And I look forward to seeing you all at the next webinars. I know we have an in-person webinar, which is a seminar, I guess, in the old language is our next one. And then we're back online after that. And if there are things that you think that we could cover or ask people to come and talk about or really consider, please do just drop me a line. I'll stick my email address in here so you can see it. I'm very happy for people to suggest things they actually use. Everyone coming. Thank you for your time. I'll post slides and references. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Bye-bye.